This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Find out more at the end of the video and find my promo discount link in the description. Hello! Normally I'd have a talking points video out shortly after Hungary, but a bit of a delay for reasons led me to using Hungary in a slightly different way. So today we're going to look at building a race strategy in general and being responsive under changeable conditions and how strategy can just go horribly wrong. And we can use Hungary as an example. The Hungarian Grand Prix was interesting because it kind of felt like a wet race, even though it really wasn't, save for a bit of drizzle and some light rain that really only affected the last couple of laps. The conditions were changing and unsure, and teams were a little bit in the dark on the expected pace of the cars and tyres, so we got that sprinkling of uncertainty that wet races tend to bring. So we went to the race with the unusual situation of Red Bull being 10th and 11th on the grid with Verstappen and Perez, respectively. Max had a power issue in Q3 and Perez did not manage to set a hot lap in the final, fastest part of Q2. In theory, this was a big open goal for Ferrari, who should have grabbed the pole position. The general consensus is that in the wafer-thin balance between the Ferrari and the Red Bull, the Ferrari car handles the corners faster, whereas Red Bull edges it out on the straights. So, at a low-power, wiggly, corner-tastic track like Hungaroring, it looked like Ferrari could really edge out Red Bull. But George Russell stole a sneaky pole for Mercedes, and his teammate Hamilton could have easily taken one of the front row slots himself, but for a DRS failure. So he too was out of position really, 7th on the grid, more on him later. Nonetheless, Ferrari still looked like the fastest package, so seemed likely to steal the win and make some headway on Red Bull, who'd have to fight from rows 5 and 6. Horner said Max was aiming for 5th position in the race. As usual, before the race, Pirelli released their analysis on what the best possible race strategies might look like based on the tyre data they'd been gathering across the weekend and before. In this case, there were two clear strategies that seemed, in Pirelli's words, as good as each other. The first would see drivers starting on soft tyres, running a short stint into the late teens and then dividing the rest of the race into 2 medium stints. A 2-stopper. The other strategy was a 1-stopper across 2 stints, one on mediums and the longer on hards. We'll just ignore these other 2. So this is what the main 2 stints look like, and as we can see, eventual race winner Max Verstappen did end up running a race to a very similar strategy, with just slightly earlier stops. And we'll get to that. What we first need to talk about is why these 2 strategies, labelled by Pirelli as quick as each other, remember, were not actually as quick as each other at all. And that's because of the weather. 2 things happened that made this weekend's Hungarian Grand Prix unusual. Firstly, it rained several times across the Saturday, essentially resetting the track surface and making it green. When we say the track is green, we basically mean it's fresh, unused, not bedded in by cars running across it. Across the weekend, F1 cars and often other support series will practice, qualify and race across several sessions before the actual Grand Prix on Sunday. As the cars run, they lay down rubber on the tarmac, particularly across the racing line, and rubber tyres on a rubbered track is a lot grippier than tyres on a fresh green track. Anyway, when rain comes, it often tends to lift a lot of this lovely rubbered in part of the track and it all goes back to zero again. The second thing that made this weekend unusual was just how cold it was. It was at least 10 degrees colder on race day than normal, around 20 degrees ambient instead of the normal 30 to 35 degrees for Budapest in late July. The race in Hungary is usually hot, a scorcher you might say. This time it was extremely mild and this affects the tyres. So a refresher on tyre compounds then. Very important when making strategies. There are 5 compounds, C1 being the hardest, C5 being the softest, and Pirelli will pick 3 of these for any given race. Now the softest tyres tend to be the quickest of the bunch, but work for the shortest amount of time, degrading the quickest and shedding lap time faster than the harder compounds. Conversely, the harder compounds tend to be the slowest but are more robust, holding their pace for longer, so you can do longer stints on harder tyres. So you can build a strategy around expected lap times across stints for different tyres, adjust for the weight of the fuel which goes down over time and start to feel out what might work best for you. So far, well, maybe not simple, but all the pieces make sense. But then we've got this temperature issue. Part of what makes the soft tyres grippy, and soft, is that they are more squishy and malleable. For an exaggerated idea of the compounds, imagine the difference between chewing on chewing gum and chewing on a pencil eraser. The soft compound is the chewing gum end of things. So because the soft tyres are so malleable, they operate at a lower temperature range. If they get too hot, they start to degrade and the grip of the rubber drops dramatically. And that's why for most of this season, the softest tyre at any given weekend has tended to be used for quali and quali only. You could put in a really good single lap by pushing the tyres hard, and then they start to get a bit too hot and lose their peak performance. A really great one-lap tyre. The hards, on the other hand, really need to be worked into a usable, squishier state where their grip really comes in. The temperature range is much higher, to the point where it can actually be really hard to overcook them at all. Now, in previous seasons, the hard tyres tended to be avoided because they were just too slow. Reliable and robust, but really hard to get into a good performance zone compared to the other tyres. This year, though, they've been great. Drivers can get them to a good temperature and a good pace and keep that performance going over a long stint without too much drop-off. And this year, we've seen a lot of race strategies that just involve the medium and the hard tyre. So back to Hungary and why this second strategy from Pirelli ended up being pretty bad. And that's all down to the hard tyre and these low temperatures. The hard was really struggling to work here, and at just 20 degrees with no particularly fast corners to generate a lot of work in the tyres and heat the rubber, the hard tyres just weren't able to get into a good performance range as they might have on a normal Hungarian summer day with a nice hot track. So that's why it's odd looking at Leclerc's strategy and really anyone who ended up trying the hards. Even before the race, the teams were predicting the hards would be hot garbage, or cold garbage, I guess. So why did anyone even try it? The race started with a mixture of compounds. The Red Bull started on the softs to make up some good places in the opening laps. The Ferrari started on the mediums to go a bit longer in the first stint. Not unusual. George Russell started on softs and basically ran the Pirelli strategy like Verstappen. And his teammate, starting further back, started on mediums. Now, if you start on the mediums, you're gonna have to use a different compound at some point. Either the soft or the hard. That's the rule. Leclerc started on the mediums, but didn't run particularly long on them. And that's not very weird in itself. The tyre wear is higher at the start of the race when the cars are heavy with fuel, and it puts more energy into the tyres, taking life out. He then switched to another set of mediums. Again, not weird, and he was able to run good pace on them to take the lead of the race from Russell in the second stint. Cool. So far, going to plan. And the track was settling in nicely. There was threat of some rain and light drizzle occasionally, but nothing that was really affecting the track conditions. But for some reason, Ferrari chose to make Leclerc's second stint on mediums very short, not running them at all to the length they could run, which was an extraordinary position as it tied Ferrari's hands. This was way too early to switch to softs. They simply would not last the remaining 30 laps at any kind of pace, and you'd have to take a third stop. But he needed to use a different compound, and he'd only run mediums so far, so hards it was. They'd go to the end at least. But as predicted, they were cold garbage. Leclerc used them for just 14 laps before making a very unwelcome third stop to switch over to softs and try and salvage something. In this 14-lap stint on the hards, Leclerc lost about 16 seconds to Verstappen, going from a gap of 7.5 seconds ahead of Max to falling 8.4 seconds behind him, losing the lead and second place to Max and George. And all this included Max having a spin of his own. Utter disaster. Leclerc's stop came on lap 39, straight after Verstappen's on lap 38, as if it was some ill-thought-out attempt to cover the Red Bull, despite them being on completely different strategies. Red Bull played it to the numbers, Ferrari kind of panicked and reacted, putting themselves in this horrible position. Verstappen was great on pace all Sunday, don't get me wrong. I'd be panicked if I was Ferrari too, but you'd think Ferrari might be a steadier hand by now. And clearly they did learn immediately, as they chose to stretch out Sainz's middle stint to get him far enough into the race to be able to run one final stint on softs. Much more pacey overall, no third stop, he finished 2 places ahead. Mercedes too stayed the course, with Russell running that Pirelli strategy and Hamilton essentially running the reverse Pirelli strategy. A viable option, as Pirelli say you don't have to run these in the order they've presented them for it to work. And you could see from the lap times, Hamilton was the overall faster of the two Mercedes, outpacing Russell when they were on the same compound through the middle of the race, and really using the softs to huge effect at the end of the race. And you could see why Toto Wolff suggested a win might very well have been on the cards had Hamilton had a normal qualifying session without his DRS failure. Hamilton was on similar pace to Verstappen through the middle of the race too, actually 3.6 seconds faster on the laps they did share between pit stops. And given how much pace he had at the end, it's not absurd to say a win was a possibility. He was running a Verstappen-paced race, if you account for the compound differentiation. Now, Alonso tried the Pirelli as quick as one-stop strategy, and was kind of nowhere, saved only somewhat by having not to make a second stop. He couldn't really get any pace of that hard tyre, which he ran for 48 miserable laps. But he only lost 2 places on his grid slot, so it wasn't a complete loss. The McLarens too went for a hard stint at the end, going soft, medium, hard on both of their cars. They were able to make it work a little bit better than Alonso did, but like the Alpines and a couple of other teams, they only had 1 set of medium tyres left for the race, so they couldn't run 2 medium stints and had to try and work the hards in somehow, and it was just too cold for them. So what does this all come down to? A little bit of weather and temperature surprise for sure, and some teams made things difficult by not leaving themselves enough medium tyres to cope with the much colder conditions than anticipated. AlphaTauri, sort of conversely to Alpine, actually tried throwing soft tyres at the problem to mixed effect. And it's kind of getting tiring now making fun of Ferrari, so if they could just pull themselves together, that would be nice. There's only so many times you can make the same joke. Speaking of which, I am delighted to announce Oscar Piastri will be joining this channel as co-presenter for... And today's video was brought to you by Brilliant. Brilliant is an online learning platform designed to help you learn and develop your understanding across science, tech, engineering and mathematics in attainable, interesting ways. Where you might have previously reached your limit with, been put off by, or just not gelled well with dry educational texts, Brilliant seeks to engage you in tangible, digestible examples, illustrations and interactive tools so you can really get into a topic, play with it, think about it, and understand it. I vibe really well with it as it's similar to how I introduce concepts on this very channel. And you can go at your own pace, working perhaps on the forces at play in a tug of war to understand how tension, friction and centre of mass work together, or get into the nitty-gritty of traffic jams to discover flow mechanics and the mathematics of messy traffic. And there are plenty of learning paths to explore across the areas you're interested in or are looking to develop for your career, education, or just a playful sense of self-interest. To get started in empowering your own knowledge with Brilliant for free, visit brilliant.org/chainbear right there in my description. The first 200 of you to click that link will also be able to get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription too. So, thank you, Brilliant.